The specialists presumed that the soldiers holding crossbows with hair buns in simple clothes possibly belonged to the first grade of the rank in the nobility. This was the lowest grade, and they were called gongshi. Those in leather armour plates and round caps with pigtails were in the second grade and were called shangzao. Gongshi and shangzao were common soldiers, and they made up the majority of the army. Here, in this pit, they form the majority. Between the two walls, there's an independent column. This one, with his arms stretching forward and reins in the hands, is the driver of a chariot. In this terracotta soldier's pit, all the drivers are wearing this board-shaped cap. Their leather corselets are of better quality than the ordinary soldiers. In the front, a chariot driver was in charge of the safety of the vehicle. This was a key position.
兵马俑更发现以后，我就提出了一个想法，就是一个车的驾手头是谁呢？是右手，而不是像过去说的车左和车右。
Referring to the historical records, a driver must have been in the third grade of the rank of nobility or above. It was quite possible that they were officers at the basic level. The driver had the chariot under his command. However, one chariot could not be a fighting unit. Who was the commanding officer of the entire column? There's an officer keeping his hand on his sword who looks serious and dignified. The cap he wears is a unique style, and his leather corselet is the finest of all the terracotta figures. The plates are delicate and well arranged, and there are bows on both the front and back, which apparently are equivalent to the epaulettes on today's military uniforms. According to the specialists, these officers should be in the 7th or 8th grade of the rank of nobility, and each one commands at least one column. This is the officer ranked between the driver and the column commander. He also wears the board-shaped cap. But there's a ridge in the middle of the cap. He's possibly an officer at the basic level in charge of a group of the column. The terracotta soldiers reveal only a small part of the military system in Qin state. A lot of the details are still unknown. In world military history, the Qin army was most probably the first to set up an integrated military rank system. Its organization and administration were quite close to those of present-day armed forces. It was because of this rigidly stratified and orderly disciplined system that the Qin army was much more effective than those of the other states. In this integrated underground army group, the soldiers and the officers are all in their position and ready for action. There should be an overall commander. However, the archaeologists discovered that the highest ranking officer present here is the column commander, which resembles the position of a regimental commander in a modern army. Why does this reproduction of the Qin army not have a commander-in-chief? In 238 BC, the Qin king, Yingjiang, later the first emperor of Qin who unified the country, took over power at the age of 22. The solemn coronation took place at Xiangyang Palace. Yingjiang inherited the throne at the age of 13, but as he was too young to govern, the administration of the state fell to the Queen Mother. It was a ceremony to declare the full power of the king. From then on, the fate of the Qin would be controlled by this young man. As the ceremony was in process, a long-planned rebellion broke out outside the palace. A man named Lao Ai and his men charged into the palace in order to seize power despite the danger. However, the rebellion ended in failure. Lao Ai was executed. As recorded by Sima Qian, the rebels killed a few hundred people, but failed to get the support of the army. They were only a few thousand in number, and they were quickly wiped out. Lao Ai's position was in the top 20th rank of nobility, and his power was second only to the king. For a time, he actually decided everything in the kingdom. Nevertheless, even a top official like him was not in a position to persuade the army into action. He tried to use the king and the Queen Mother's seals to instigate rebellion within the army, but it did not work. Who then, in Qin, had power over the army? There existed something called the Tiger Tally. Each tally was torn into 2 pieces, and the king and the army commanders kept each piece separately. According to the Qin laws, anyone who needed an army of over 50 men in peacetime had to present to the commander the relevant Tiger Tally piece from the king. When the 2 pieces were put together and found to fit, the tally was effective. So the Tiger Tally was symbolic of command over the army, and the king could rest assured that this power remained in his own hands. The Qin king must have had many Tiger Tallies. When King Yingzheng was informed of the rebellion, he immediately sent for the palace guards, and the rebels were quickly suppressed. It was impossible to steal the tally, and so the rebellious Lao Ai could not get support from the armed forces. His rising was doomed to failure. The terracotta soldiers here, as the symbol of the Qin army, can have had only one commander-in-chief, and that was the first Qin emperor himself, who now lies 1 kilometer away, buried under a huge mound of earth. The Qin army had the good fortune to be commanded by just one single leader and fought for 6 generations to unify China. However, perhaps this also led to its downfall. In 210 BC, the emperor died during a tour of inspection. 3 years after his death, that great army came to the end of its own history. The unification of China by Qin was a turning point in Chinese history, but was also the starting point for the demise of the Qin state. The Qin Empire lasted just 15 years. The once unconquerable army was also destroyed with the downfall of the empire. It struggled, but its combat effectiveness was very different from what it had been 15 years before. Qin's last days began with a story known to all Chinese. One night, during heavy rain, a 900-strong detachment of the army was marching. Due to the rain, however, they were delayed. Anyone who missed arriving in time for a military engagement should be executed. The 900 rose in rebellion. People all over the country immediately rose with them. The uprising quickly spread to all corners of the country. When the rebels approached the capital, Xianyang, they encountered a troop of defenders who were not part of the regular army, but a unit cobbled together from prisoners. These were the prisoners who had been working on the gigantic project of the underground tomb of the first emperor of Qin. The names on these terracotta pieces provide a proof of their hard work. As the uprising came to within just 5 kilometers of the capital, the second Qin emperor set these prisoners free and ordered them to fight against the rebels. So where was the main force of the Qin army? After the unification of the country, the main Qin army was separated into two parts. One was at the fortress near Guilin in Guangxi named Guanyan, where some 500,000 soldiers had just subdued the southern aboriginals and were safeguarding the southern borders. They chose not to act at this life and death moment of the empire. As Sima Qian wrote in the historical records, the highest-ranking officer on the spot ordered all the roads connecting the south and the north to be blocked and declared that none should go up north to join in the fighting. Thus, the army in the south abandoned the empire they had once created. The other part of the main force was in the north of the empire. They had 300,000 men and had defeated the Huns in the north. They stayed there to watch over the Great Wall along the border. When the capital was in danger, they set out for the south, but for some unknown reason, they were very slow in arriving. So it was only the ramshackle troops formed of prisoners who fought to defend the capital. Nevertheless, they were extremely brave and soon wiped out the 100,000 rebels. The seriously wounded empire seemed to have survived. Then, a nobleman from the original southern state of Chu changed the fate of the Qin Empire forever. His name was Xiang Yu. The two remaining Qin armies joined together and fought against Xiang Yu's army at the area now called Jiulu in Hebei province. However, hundreds of thousands of Qin fell before the brave Chu army, and the rest were surrounded. The Qin army was then completely destroyed. Historians assume that it was possibly Xiang Yu who burnt and destroyed these terracotta soldiers. The all-powerful army had been unconquerable over the past 500 years, but was annihilated in a flash. It was shocking, and even today is difficult to believe. The arrogant birth and sudden death of the Qin Empire seem to have been decided by an irresistible force. And it was this same hidden force that decided the army's fate. In Chinese history, the Qin culture was unique. They adapted utilitarianism and pragmatism and were endowed with creativity and initiative. They seemed to prize above all regulation and discipline. They believed the power of military force could solve all problems. Probably a cultural tradition such as this was the decisive factor in the empire's emergence and rise, but at the same time, the cause of its downfall. It was the first emperor of Qin who brought the army to its brilliant peak. However, this emperor was too ambitious and exhausted the strength of his empire. Logically, the strength of the army depends on the strength of the state. During the last days of Qin, the empire was in disarray. When the soldiers were at the front, their families were suffering in poverty. The fate of the empire was doomed. Now, when we look back again at these military men of 2,000 years ago, we can see it was these people who created what was then the world's largest empire and thus created our history. Our writing today comes from the Qin. Our vast homeland is based on that great empire. The Qin Empire gave birth to an integrated Chinese nation. Our blood and soul are still linked with that great empire over 2,000 years ago.